Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the Phosphates on the Somerset Levels and Moors stakeholder briefing for today, the 12th of March. On behalf of the Somerset Planning Authorities, I would like to welcome you all here today and to talk to you and share with you what we've done so far to address the issues of nutrients on the Somerset Levels and Moors Ramsar site. The District Council and the County Planning Authority, as Waste and Minerals, are all working together collectively across the 5 authorities to try and find a comprehensive way forward to tackle this issue. We've invited you all here today as it's important that we engage with our stakeholders and that you can help us as we shape the mitigation solutions for the work that we need to do moving forwards. Can I have the next slide, please? I'm Helen Vittery. I think I've just said that, but with me today are Rebecca Miller and Paul Browning from Somerset West and Taunton. We've got Peter Thornton from Royal Haskoning, who've been working with us to identify our way forward, and Matt Hurd from Natural England, who's here to assist with any questions that you may have later. Also listening with us today, we have the Right Honourable Rebecca Powell, who is the MP for Taunton Deane, and she's got an interest in this issue. Next slide, please. This slide sets out a plan for the next half hour, 40 minutes, which should leave us with sufficient time at the end for questions, and we will give you the answers as best we can, but please rest assured all of the questions and the answers will be collated and they will be posted on our websites later on, once we've had a chance to do that, along with a recording of this session. So if you want to watch again or if anyone's missed out, they can play catch up. Next slide, please. So turning to what's brought us here today. Natural England wrote to the district and the county planning authorities last year, to the districts in August and the county in November, to issue us with their position with regard to development that adversely impacts on the Somerset Levels and Moors Ramsar site. This letter followed the outcome of a case known as the Dutch nitrogen case, which was an international issue and something that's impacting numerous sites nationally, but specifically to Somerset, the Somerset Levels and Moors Ramsar catchment. As planning authorities, we are obliged to ensure that all development is nutrient neutral, and for Somerset, that means that we need to protect the Somerset Levels and Moors. We need to have specific consideration of phosphates rather than the nitrates that some other areas have had to look at due to the levels of phosphorus and their impact across the Ramsar wetland. Next slide, please. The types of development that are impacted within the catchment are listed here for your information. Residential units. When we look at commercial developments, it's usually, although not exclusively, developments that include overnight accommodation that are caught by this change. And similarly with agricultural development, this is likely to apply to developments that involve either an intensification or an addition of phosphate loading as a result of the development that's proposed. Full details can be found on each of the District Council web pages, and there's an example here for Somerset West and Taunton. Next slide, please. So this is the indicative map from Natural England that accompanied the letter that we received. It shows the extent of the impacted area, mainly made up of river catchments for the Tone, the Parrot, the Brew and the Axe, although it does show some of the wastewater catchments where these sit outside of the river catchment areas. The red hatched areas are the triple SI locations that make up the Ramsar site. This shows the catchments and the subcatchments, but we know that there are some areas included here which will be excluded as we move forwards. This map is in the process of being refined as part of the work that we are doing and the work that we will be doing, so these anomalies will be tackled. Next slide, please. So this chart, I hope you can see, this pie chart shows the principal sources of phosphate, and this is specific to the Somerset County area, with the primary contributor being wastewater treatment facilities. And as a result, we are working very closely with Wessex Water as they seek to deliver the improvement plans that they've got in place to tackle their outputs. It's also important that we therefore tackle the change to residential development that will increase water loading on these treatment facilities. Next slide, please. Okay, at this point, I'm going to hand over to Paul to continue.
Thank you very much, Helen. Good morning, all. In terms of what we do, we as planners acted as ringmasters effectively. We invited all the DM policy leads across the local authorities in Somerset to a big tent meeting. It also involved statutory stakeholders such as Wessex Water, also our colleagues in North Somerset, Dorset, and also our colleagues in Exmoor National Park, because part of the map you've seen previously includes a small element, or possibly a small element, of the national park. We sat down and considered the overall implications of the Natural England letter and came out with a variety of practical actions. These related to, first of all, policy work, for example, informing the brief for the strategy work. For example, what is the geographical extent in a more definitive way? Policy DM matters, i.e. things that we needed to consider straight away. At that time, we had no tool to actually look at the phosphate issue. Hence, there was a need to look at that matter. Similarly, there were other things around DM matters, such as GIS layers. We needed to be clear on our policies of how we were processing planning applications. Also, the types of planning applications that could be caught by the Natural England letter. Similarly, there was information sharing from our statutory undertakers. At that early stage, Wessex Water's plans to upgrade their network in terms of their treatment works. That needed to be fed into the system as well. Finally, we realised that we collectively needed to compile and bring together our frequently asked questions, because we were all being asked questions from different parties, different developers, interest groups, and to those ends, to manage the process, we started collating frequently asked questions. And lastly, governance structures. Clearly, what we tried to do was build on existing partnerships. Historically, the policy side have had a long-standing relationship where anything affecting Somerset levels and moors, we'd often done partnership working in terms of flood mitigation measures and also strategic flood mitigation schemes, etc. And then there was another angle as well, learning on what our colleagues elsewhere had learnt in, say, Dorset, for example, the Solent, in terms of trying to lobby central government, but also doing it in a way that we actually collated the factual information about what it was having, the factual impacts on our economy in terms of numbers, the magnitude of the issue that we faced. To those ends, it created consensus about how we were going to go forward collectively as the Somerset authorities. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So, having had that big tent meeting, and us as a local planning authority officers acting as we do, like ringmasters, we carried on that role in collectively each of our individual organisations. We informed our parish councils, developers, agents through various meetings and briefings, and as well as doing internal briefings to our own organisation, because here in Somerset West and Taunton, we do have an arm's length parts of the organisation that are delivering strategic growth on land that we own, but also looking for other angles. For example, our enablers, our housing enablers, they need to be informed about the implications of the phosphate matters. Having done that, as I said, we've looked at governance structures. We really built on existing structures that were already there at the director level for a steering group. Similarly, the DM and policy subgroups were already really in existence. Remember that each of the authorities has its own lead. To those ends, in due course, if you do have queries after this event, please speak to the representative in that local authority where your planning application is being considered or the matter is being trying to be addressed. Collectively, we are then focused on solutions. I think in terms of solutions, they're very much short term, the interim, the phosphate calculator, which we're going to presently pass over to Rebecca onto, and then that should come back to me in terms of medium to long term solutions, a stream of work that's tied to the strategy work. Next slide, please. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Paul. So I'm going to talk to you about where we've got to with the phosphate budget calculator that we have produced. So as Somerset Western Taunton led on the development of the phosphate calculator, we have been working really closely with Royal Haskonian, who produced it for us, and the other development management leads across Somerset to get to the point where we've got a bespoke calculator for Somerset. And the reason it's for Somerset is it takes into account all the necessary data for Somerset. So the purpose of this calculator is to allow applicants to calculate their own phosphate budget, and it will allow you to establish any required mitigation to show that with sufficient and reasonable certainty that the proposal does not have an adverse impact on the Somerset levels and moors Ramsar site. So the calculator allows you to calculate what the proposed development generates in terms of phosphates, and it also allows you to calculate what the existing use generates to give you an overall total of the mitigation required. As I said, Royal Haskonian produced this calculator for us, but it has been agreed by Natural England, and it has been informed by data that we've gained and gathered from Wessex Water and the Environment Agency. Next slide, please. So we have done quite a lot of testing of the calculator before we launched it at the end of February. We ran a number of sites through the calculator, and at that point it was an Excel-based spreadsheet, and the tests we ran through the calculator did raise issues and concerns about the data sets and the data integrity, which we resolved before we launched the calculator at the end of February. We launched a calculator along with a user guide and a video to help and assist applicants or their agents in using the calculator. So this tool can be used to determine planning applications, and as I've said, when applicants are using the calculator, they need to seek their own professional advice to understand the results and understand how to translate that into deliverable solutions. So effectively, what we've produced is a tool that developers can use to understand how much phosphate mitigation their proposed development will need to mitigate. Next slide, please. We were successful in securing some funding from Homes England, which we have used to develop this calculator, and therefore it is free and available for everyone in Somerset to use, and it's hosted on each of the 4 planning authorities' websites. And there was a link earlier in the presentation to the location of the calculator on the web for the Somerset Western Taunton's website. We fully recognise that whilst this calculator is a big step forward in terms of understanding how much mitigation developments are going to require, it is only the first step, and we need to do further research and guidance to understand what type of mitigations measures and their design are suitable for specific developments. I'm going to hand back over to Paul, who's going to talk to you a bit more about the next steps.
Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Yes, in terms of this slide, this gives an overview of where, and a helpful overview of where we're trying to go on various work streams that are labelled under the Somerset Phosphate Management Strategy. Basically, the time frame is reporting back by autumn 2021, i.e. this autumn. There are a number of work streams tied to the phosphate management strategy. First of all, it's the geographic extent of the area at risk. when you refer back to this presentation, you look at the map that we've presented from Natural England, it is very fuzzy around the boundaries, but also it doesn't really take account of some of the hydrological movements of water that occur around the levels of moors, some of which are for balancing the water table, and also in winter months managing flood mitigation measures, managing the movement of water. To those ends, we realise that as part of the strategy work, we have to actually review the geographic extent of the area at risk. Similarly, the types of development. Whilst our web pages have a very detailed, and we've alluded to the broad extent of the types of development are affected, there is some ambiguity in places, and we're still interpreting based on case law the types of applications that are affected, and also at what stage. Also, as Rebecca has talked to you about, the development of the calculator. It is a tool, a lens to look at the phosphate issue. It is really our first version. Yes, there's nothing like going out to the real world to test such a thing. It is freely available, but we know it will need to be improved as we progress. So this is also another part of this strategy work. Similarly, in terms of the overall strategy work development, it has to be very much on a sub-catchment area basis. When we talk about a sub-catchment area basis, I'm really referring to the river catchments of the River Tone, which covers my authority, Somerset, West and Taunton, but also the Parrett for South Somerset predominantly, also the Brewer and the Axe. And to those ends, that's why it involves not only us, our colleagues at South Somerset, but also in Mendip and Sedgemoor as well. In terms of looking at that strategy work, we'll be looking for solutions that are very much tied to those individual catchment areas. So therefore, if a development is, say, in the River Tone catchment area, we cannot look for mitigation measures in the Parrett catchment area, for example. Similarly, in terms of this strategy work, embedding it within the statutory local plan process, as we are all aware, in Somerset, each of the districts and the county are at different stages of that local plan process. The nearest to being in alignment are probably our colleagues in South Somerset and us. Our colleagues in Mendip have been going through a local plan examination. Our colleagues in Sedgemoor had their statutory local plan produced something 18 months ago, and now considering starting a new review. Similarly, our colleagues at county in terms of the minerals and waste local plans also are doing reviews as well. Then we need some form of SPD that has to be hanged off a statutory or local plan policy. To those ends, the degree I've talked about in terms of where we are in the local plan process means that we need to give that greater thought in terms of how we supplement, agree methods, tariffs, administering, implementing, managing, monitoring, ensuring that the same piece of land is not double counted, for example. Furthermore, the land that we do put forward for mitigation measures also delivers what it's supposed to be delivering. And then lastly, the element of training and stakeholder events. Today is really the first session of bringing together a wide range of stakeholders. If you consider planning in terms of the 3 pillars, in terms of the social, the environmental, the economic, this is probably the first meeting we've had that's involved all of those groups that we've invited to a meeting such as this. Hopefully, as we've explained, we've really only on the start of this journey. You know, we're only 4 months in, but we seem to have progressed very rapidly in a short period of time. The strategy work that we're involved in will have to embrace stakeholder engagement for the next few months. Next slide, please. Thank you. In terms of where we are in terms of the strategy work, on behalf of all the local authorities, Somerset West and Taunton commissioned the strategy work. We went out to tender at the beginning of this year, having worked on the brief closely with our colleagues in Natural England, Wessex Water and others. To those ends, the closing dates for that tender process were the 11th of February, and as of the 25th, as set out there, we sent intention to award the contract with Royal Haskellning. To those ends, we've had an inception meeting, and I'm crossing the T's and dotting the I's this week on the contractual side of the work. So that work has now commenced. Next slide, please. The next part of this presentation I'm really doing on behalf of our colleagues in Wessex Water, because as local planning authorities, we realised at the very early stages we needed to understand what Wessex Water's plans were improving their network as defined by AMP, Asset Management Plan 7. In terms of where we're going in that, the work that we have done to date hasn't been in isolation. The work that Wessex Water are doing to enhance their network is an important part of the jigsaw that we need to understand in terms of addressing this issue about phosphate neutrality on the levels of moors. Next slide, please. Thank you. I think it's fair to say that Wessex Water approved their final business plan in August 2019. Their drivers are very much limited, are determined by Ofwat. Ofwat's responsibilities are really about pricing and protecting the customer's interest, encouraging competition, and also adding investment in the water industry. Their timetable, as shown here, doesn't really coincide with the local plan timetables or the pressures that we as the local authorities have been facing in the last few months with the phosphate issues. You can see here the board determined their business plan in January 2020. Furthermore, they were informed that Natural England changed their position in June 2020, slightly before us. However, what this means is that their business plans, which I'm coming on to next, also need to take account when we move to the next period of AMP 8. From an outsider looking in, I have to say, and this is my personal opinion, that the process that Wessex Water and the water industry have for accepting their business plans is probably less transparent to those looking in than those who are involved in it. When you look at our local plan process, you can always follow that golden thread of how a plan or policy evolved, right from the issues and options phase right through to the adoption stage. Hopefully, when we move to AMP8, the process that our colleagues in the water industry have in terms of producing their plans will become more transparent. Next slide, please. Right. In terms of where Wessex Water are currently, they aim to remove 303 tonnes per annum of phosphorus by 2027. That is a combination of new infrastructure, that's new filtration technology being brought into their existing facilities that are around the county, adapting the current technology that's on the existing sites and improving it. Also through catchment offsetting, such as, for example, their trading platform, Entrade. Entrade has got its own website. To those ends, that it is being piloted within the Somerset locality. 2 river catchments have been prioritised, those being the River Tone and the Parrett, i.e. those covering predominantly Somerset, Western Taunton and South Somerset. As said there, they're delivering their fair share targets by 2027. Furthermore, they are investing some 150 million in terms of improving their technology. The pie chart shown in the left shows the broad composition and makeup of where the phosphates in terms of the infrastructure improvements, asset optimization and catchment offsetting are likely to yield. Note they have stretch targets. Those stretch targets are what they aim to achieve in terms of they know what they are definitely going to do, but they're also trying to improve and make their facilities actually improve beyond what they've legally committed to do. Next slide, please. As I referred to earlier, we also made significant effort across the local authorities to collate the economic and funding impacts that the Natural England letter would have on the Somerset authorities, and we reported and used that information with regard to our ask to central government. The contents of that ask were widely reported on our district council letter of the 3rd of December. It's on our website, and I understand it's on most of the other district local authorities' website. What we have done today is we probably learned the lessons from our colleagues elsewhere in the country when they wrote to government. We tried to make sure that was a golden thread right from the highest level of making sure that we were advising that we would find it difficult to meaningfully contribute to the government's ambition of delivering 300 homes per annum. The reason was because we had stored applications. At the time, our initial assessment was that across the county as a whole, some 11,000 dwellings were tied up with stored planning applications. Of this, some 2,400 were approximately associated with affordable housing units. Similarly, we had funding bids, for example, as mentioned there, HIF, high 5-year housing land supply issues, etc. Clearly, this has a knock-on effect for our 5-year housing plan supply. We will find it difficult demonstrating 5-year housing supplies. Once again, this is one of our asks in terms of central government suspending the requirement for 5-year housing land supply. Similarly, stored economic growth plans, town centre regenerations. Here in Somerset West and Taunton, we have a future High Street Fund bid. Our colleagues in South Somerset as well have got a similar bid. There was concerns about the economic impact that would have not only on our own plans, but also the small to medium-sized enterprises that make up the significant supply chains here in Somerset. Reason why we focused on small to medium size is that those types of developments are unlikely to be able to actually make sure their mitigation measures are on site. They're physically not geographically large enough to actually have such mitigation measures on site, and therefore be looking for more of a likely for an off-site solution. Collectively, this will result in a loss of confidence to investors. Next slide, please. So, as I said, our ask to central government was for time extensions on funding programs. I mentioned the future High Street Fund bid. There's also a housing and investment fund, which we work with our colleagues at county. Similarly, there was issues around revenue monies. We have been awarded money from Homes England to address the funding of the phosphate calculator, also to employ additional ecologists. At the present moment in time, just here at Somerset West and Taunton, our initial assessment when we had the letter was some 300 planning applications were caught by the letter. Currently, we are down to approximately 80 applications awaiting a HRA, that's a habitats regs assessment. So we have been moving things along as rapidly as we can. Similarly, we're looking for capital money, support the strategic flood solutions measures at a sub-regional catchment area level. When you consider, for example, historically, authorities in Somerset have done strategic flood mitigation measures. Here in Taunton, for example, Long Run Meadows. If we look at that in terms of future schemes across the county, to those ends, we can think about making sure that such schemes not only address flooding, but also biodiversity, our climate change agenda. We make sure there's a win-win for these types of schemes coming forward. As I've said, lastly, the suspension of the 5-year land supply. It's interesting that the government have been very silent on that matter. We wait to see where we go on it. Currently, we have started on this journey. It's probably fair to say we're only 4 months in. We've tried to move this forward, this debate forward as best we can by placing, for example, our summary of our council's advice on our websites, so you can see where we're going. Hopefully, we will use today's events and the matters that are raised shortly in the question and answer session to inform our response to the government's letter of the 25th of January to all of us. As I said, we have yet to respond to this letter, so ideally, I would like to go back with them in light of the feedback on the matters you raised in the question and answer session, which follows in a few minutes' time. I think that nicely links over to Helen and the last few slides of this presentation. Next slide, please. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you, Paul. So a little bit of a summary really from me. This has been our first real opportunity to engage with you all as stakeholders and potential stakeholders to make sure that you are aware of the issues that we've been facing, what we've been doing and what we are going to do to move towards finding solutions. As Paul has said, we have commenced work on the phosphate strategy for Somerset, and we do want to engage with you moving forward. To that end, when we publish our question and answers, and when we post the recording of this session, we will also be putting up a form for you to register your interest if you feel that you can contribute or would like to be part of that work moving forwards. The SPD, as Paul has said, is anticipated in the autumn, and we are looking for it to deliver a number of outcomes. Next slide, please. So we have actively engaged with those directly impacted already. Each of the planning authorities are engaged with their developers, applicants, agents. We collectively have been talking to the House Builders Federation, and we've been speaking to DEFRA, as well as obviously Natural England, Wessex Water and the others that have been mentioned. We are looking to bid for monies as a joint authority bid to the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund, because we do anticipate that there will be more work required once we have our draft SPD and we've got a strategy to move forward. We know that there's going to be a need for us to secure mitigation, and we're looking at how we can deliver that in anticipation now. Next slide, please. So that brings us to the end of what we've formally got to say to you. I know there's been a lot of questions going into the chat, and I know that the team, specifically Simon, has been doing his best to respond to those. So what I would like to do is, if anyone's got any questions specifically for the panel, do please pop those into the chat box, and we'll try and draw out some of the common themes and answer those as best we can. Leanne, is there anything to start with, please?
Hiya. Yeah, there's been quite a few coming in, some quite specific ones, but some of the things that are coming up quite regularly are lots of queries regarding particular updates to the calculator, so as and when cases are coming up, incorporating certain things like campsites, particularly agricultural issues. There's been a few queries regarding an agricultural calculator, so just some sort of clarification on how we might be managing those things.
Thank you. Rebecca, can I pass this one to you to take, please?
Helen, I was going to pass it to Peter.
Ah, perfect. Have we got Peter with us?
Helen, apologies. It doesn't look though Peter is on the call with us at the moment.
Right, so we've lost Peter, Rebecca, unfortunately.
I will do the best I can to answer that question. But obviously, Peter from Royal Haskoning had been working on and producing the calculator for us, so he would be best placed to answer. But in terms of amendments and changes to the calculator, as we said during the presentation, as and when we get new data and more information, the calculator will be updated, and that information will be from Wessex Water and Natural England in the main. In terms of, are we going to extend the calculator to look at other types of development. What we could do, and as Paul has mentioned in his presentation, is as part of the next step in the strategic solution, we are looking to review the calculator and understand if it is working as we had anticipated. So if we could capture those specific questions, we can review that as part of the review of the calculator that's ongoing.
Thanks, Rebecca. And I would confirm that the strategy work that we're going to be looking at will be reviewing the calculator. We are collecting feedback and we will be keeping it under review as we move forwards. I think it's fair to say. One of the questions that I've seen is, would development that can show nutrient neutrality be considered in advance of SPD coming forwards? Sorry, Rebecca, as planning lead, coming back to you for that one.
Helen, could you repeat that question? Sorry.
No problem at all. So would development that can demonstrate nutrient neutrality be considered in advance of the SPD? Yes,
it can. So if consultants can identify in either a shadow HRA or HRA that the Somerset Ecology Service produced that it is phosphate neutral development, then obviously there's no likely significant effect on the Somerset levels and moors around our site, and therefore that development will be able to proceed.
Thank you. Leanne, sorry, I'm struggling to pull out the questions. Is there another one that you can share with us, please?
Yep, so lots of questions on the end trade scheme and mitigation. How are we going to identify mitigation sites? Will there be a call for sites? And questions on other tariff schemes that are an alternative to the end trade and Wessex Water scheme?
Paul, can I pass this one to you? Because I think this falls within the strategy remit.
I think it does, Helen. Yes, the end trade scheme, as you're aware, Helen, you've got a unique role because you sit on both the policy subgroup and the DM subgroup, partly because of your role as a planning officer covering both the DM and policy matters, but also because us as most of the Somerset local authorities buy in yours via service level agreement, your ecology service, which is integral to our response. In terms of the end trade scheme, that is Wessex Water. I can assure people we're working behind the scenes with our colleagues like Guy Thompson, Dave Baxter at End Trade in terms of the pilot scheme. To those ends, they have explained what they're trying to achieve, the underlying assumptions that they're working with. What they're trying to do is create a market on the supply side, whereby landowners can put forward land for phosphate stripping, i.e. mitigation measures, and then likewise from the demand side, planning applications, it will afford an opportunity for those requiring phosphate credits to operate within the market. It has had a first phase in terms of piloting to express interests. To those ends, my understanding, they're keen to move to the next stage of the process. There is a website. As I said, I am not a Wessex Water officer. Those requests about end trade would have to go to Wessex Water. Be aware that it is just one trading platform. There could be other opportunities, but at this stage of the process, where we need to make sure that we've got potential and afford opportunities for landowners and developers to offset and make sure their development is phosphate neutral, it is one string to a bow. And that's what I'm just saying, it is one string. There could be other options coming forward as part of the strategy work. To those ends, the strategy work, we've already acknowledged with Royal Haskellning that there will need to be significant engagement in terms of looking at a subcatchment area approach to solutions. We're mindful of our colleagues down in Dorset, whereby they've used existing land ownership in terms of bringing forward sites for nitrates. especially around the Poole Harbour area, where land in existing ownership has been removed from intensive certain agricultural activities. To those ends, when you look at, for example, my own authority, we'll be probably looking at our existing assets that have come into the council's ownership. You can think of Norton Hillfort that came into the ownership of Somerset Western Taunton and the Charitable Trust last year. There's also things like the community woodland as part of the garden communities over at Monkton Heathfield, looking at the issue about phosphates, and similarly our other assets as well that we control either directly or indirectly with partners, for example Long Run Meadows, the extension of possibly, or other solutions. So as I said, there are a number of activities. Hopefully I've covered them. Anything else you want to cover from your side, Helen? Bear in mind your ecology service hat on.
No, I think it's just fair to say that the end trade model is one option, and that we will be looking through the strategy at numerous options, numerous different solutions, various mitigation proposals, and how we can bring them forward to complement each other and work together. Thanks, Paul. There's a question here that I think we ought to perhaps bring Matt Hurd in to support with, if that's okay, Matt. And that is, do Natural England support and accept your current calculator and understand that there will be further iterations as information becomes available?
Helen, thanks. So yes, we've worked with you obviously on the calculator that you've published now. There is more work ongoing to refine that, but that's only you know, as we assess more evidence as it comes on board. So yes, we've worked with you on the current calculator. There is work going to refine it, but we'll do that with you.
Thanks, Matt. That's really helpful. I see there's a question about the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund. It's a joint bid that we're all putting together, and I guess I'm leading on that for now. In the first instance, if you want to drop me a line if you are contributing or think you can contribute to that, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Leanne, was there another sort of question that we can pick up and take forward, please?
Yeah, so lots of questions on how we're quantifying likely significant effect on the Ramsar, and how we might be monitoring the Ramsar condition moving forward, and where this information might be available, and I guess monitoring in terms of success as well. So quite a few questions on that, maybe for Matt.
Thanks. So the current position, I suppose, in many ways is simpler, but that our advice is that, you know, development shouldn't add to what is already a bad situation with nutrients on the Somerset levels and moors. Nutrient rates, phosphorus rates are sort of up to 5 times what they should be against their targets. So our advice is that development shouldn't add to that problem. It must be nutrient neutral.
Thank you, Matt. That's really helpful. I see, looking at other questions in the chat function, that there are questions around the calculator, being able to save it and being able to retain copies. If you are experiencing issues, could I ask that you send them through to your district council lead, please? And we will of course keep them under review as we look at the calculator and any updates that are required going forwards. Thank you very much. Leanne, sorry to come back to you. If there's another question, please.
Sorry, bear with me, I'm just going through. There's quite a few coming through. Lots of questions again on the delay with planning applications and how many planning applications are being caught by this issue and how we're managing this moving forward, especially with the housing need. And specific question here as well about what are the timescales for Natural England and presumably the local planning authorities to respond to HRAs and specific mitigation proposals given the backlog.
Who would like to take that one?
Do you want me to come in, Helen?
Should we get Rebecca and then we can come to Matt? Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. So as Paul mentioned, I can only really speak for Somerset West and Taunton Council. We have approximately 80 applications on hold as we speak today. We did start off with 300. And as guidance and advice have come out, we have been able to issue decisions on a vast majority of the backlog of applications, or they've been able to demonstrate they've either been phosphate neutral or provide a mitigation strategy. So as we sit here today, as I said, Somerset West and Taunton have approximately 80 on hold, and we will, as and when solutions come out, we will triage those applications, and if a HRA is submitted to us by the applicant and it demonstrates that the development is phosphate neutral, at that point we will then consult the Somerset Ecology Service and Natural England for their advice on that matter. But I guess I can just reassure everyone that as and when solutions do start coming forward, we will be determining planning applications as quickly and as efficiently as we can. But until each individual application has a solution, it will need to remain on hold.
Thank you, Rebecca. Matt, did you have something to add to that with regard to the second part of the question?
Only to reinforce what Rebecca said there. I think so. We've got our team sort of prioritised on this. We're ready to work with developers if they need additional advice from us, and we're working with the local authorities to look at any assessments, HABS regs assessments as they come through. So we are able to look at individual cases as well as working on the long-term strategy with you.
Thank you, Matt. Leanne, can I come back to you for another one, please?
Yeah, so there's a specific question here. Were the Dorset councils affected by the Solent nutrient issue successful in suspending the need to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply? So following on from my earlier question, is this something that Somerset perhaps could do?
Paul, can I ask you to take that one?
Thank you. We're pursuing that one as part of our letter. If you look at our letter to central government in December, we raised the issue about the difficulties of demonstrating a 5-year housing land supply. I'm not aware that our colleagues in Dorset were successful. The response that we had back in January did not talk about that response, hence why I made reference to it in my presentation to you, that I want to use today's events and outcomes to inform and influence our response back to central government. Collectively, I've been around quite a long time. I've been a chartered planner since the early 90s, and often it's not what government says, it's what government doesn't say that's more interesting.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Paul.
Ellen.
Thanks. Just picking up on a question that I can see. The phosphate mitigation strategy by the council seems to be a policy overview rather than about providing solutions. Is it anticipated that mitigation will be reliant entirely on the private sector, whereas elsewhere councils have worked to secure strategic mitigation solutions that developers can buy into? Just to confirm, the policy overview will be a part of the strategy work that we are doing. We are also looking for mitigation strategies, mitigation options, and other partners that can help us deliver this sort of mitigation. So it is not just a policy review, and we will not be reliant entirely on private sector or any one company to deliver these solutions for us. I think that's fair to say. Leanne, sorry, coming back to you.
Someone said, what will be the likely time lag between publication of the SPD, setting out the tariff, and delivery of phosphate mitigation on the ground?
Good question. Anybody like to take that one? Silent. I think it's fair to say that we are already working on mitigation solutions. We're already working towards what the councils collectively can achieve in terms of mitigation, and we're working with developers to find solutions where we can on site, and where we can't, how we can move forward with solutions off site. We're very much not sitting back and waiting for the outcome of the strategy, but working with partners to move things forward as quickly as we can to unlock development. I think it's fair to say that we are all acutely aware of the impacts that this is having in Somerset, and we are doing our utmost to make sure that it is minimised and reduced and move forward as soon as we can.
Helen, would it?
Matt, please.
Would it help? So, you can hear me now, can you? Yes, yeah. So I think, I mean, you know, there's understanding, you know, of the challenges here as well, and I think we'd like to be as flexible as we can be, while, you know, while ensuring that any development, any planning permission that's granted is legally robust from challenge. And, you know, in other parts of the country, planning applications are being challenged when they don't have legally robust mitigation, you know, plans in place. I think for us, as long as there is certainty of delivery of the mitigation, then I think that gives us and should give you the confidence then that planning permission can be granted. So we wouldn't look for upfront completion of all the mitigation work, just the certainty that it's going to be delivered, and it will be delivered as the planning permission is built out.
Thank you, Matt. There is a question here. At the beginning of the presentation, you said that this would affect new residential dwellings. Would it also impact conversions, i.e. office or commercial accommodation into residential? Rebecca, can I come to you for that one, please?
Of course you can, Helen. Yes is the answer. So any new residential dwelling will be affected by this issue, and also any existing dwellings that are a one-bed property that are going to be extended into creating a 2 or 3 bed property are also caught by the issue, because it's based on the average occupancy rate per dwelling of 2.4 people per dwelling. So any increase in residential accommodation is caught regardless of whether it's a change of use from an existing office. And the reason for that is existing offices are often employ local people that already live in the catchment area, so their phosphate generation is already calculated at their point of address. Any new residential dwellings will increase the population in the area and therefore require mitigation.
Thank you. I've noted there are some comments about disappointment that people from some of the other planning authorities aren't on the call today. Just to confirm, we have all worked on this collectively. We are here representing all of the authorities because we are all working together. It's just that with Rebecca having led on the phosphate calculator as Somerset West and Taunton's commissioning lead, and with Paul working on the strategy as the commissioning lead, and with me having the overview of both planning, development management, planning policy and ecology, it was deemed that we were the best placed to tackle this today. I think it's also fair to say that each of the districts are doing their best to work their way through all of the planning applications that they have, and that to give you an exact number would only be right at the time it was produced. So each of the districts are doing their best to work through. And if you have specific questions for districts, I suggest you direct questions to their DM leads and they will be able to assist you. Leanne, is there anything else? Please.
Yeah, there's a good question here. It says, in terms of mitigation, how is the strategy being linked up with the council's climate and ecological emergency strategies?
Very good question. Paul, do you want me to take it, or are you happy to?
Do you want to take it in the first instance this time?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, we are very acutely aware of the Somerset climate emergency. We know that there is a need to link. We need to link to this very closely. We need to find mitigation solutions and way forwards that hit multiple benefits. We know there are various partners out there doing different schemes and bringing forward different proposals that can hit multiple targets. We can hit some of the climate emergency targets by changing some practices, which will also have a contributory improvement to the phosphate levels on the Somerset levels of moors. And what we're looking to do as part of the strategy is find a way to combine and record how all of those different things are coming together so that we can have the improvements all recorded in one place and we can measure the overall benefits that are being secured. Paul, did you have anything to add to that, or do you think that's a fair summary?
I think it's a fair summary. What I think we're trying to achieve is win-wins on all of these agendas.
Thank you. Leanne?
And a question here, Wiltshire Council are using SIL as a means to procure mitigation land as a short-term solution to enable delivery of stalled applications. Are we considering SIL as it seems to be a relatively quick solution for current stalled applications?
If I answer in the first instance, and then one of my colleagues can please jump in and support if need be. But I think what we need is a strategy so that if we are securing any SIL monies, we know what they're going to be used for. We need the strategy to understand what the mitigation is that we're likely to deliver if it's not on site and delivered by the developer. Does anybody else want to contribute to that response?
Can I come in there, Helen?
Please do.
Parts of the former West Somerset area that are caught don't have SIL as a statutory mechanism. For example, areas going out beyond Bishop's Lydiard are in the former West Somerset area, are caught by the Natural England letter, but there is no SIL in place because it wasn't deemed part of the statutory local plan process. So I understand where people are coming from, but of course, if you're buying SIL, buying credits, this is where we come back to looking at N-Trade as one of the options in terms of looking at your mitigation measures, especially if they're off-site. And to those ends, as I've explained, we as local authorities are working with our colleagues at Wessex Water to try and bring forward such schemes. The beauty, if N-Trade is developed as anticipated, is that the supply side, if schemes are not performing as anticipated, I believe that Wessex Water are considering underwriting their schemes. To those ends, what that will mean, it will create certainty for you as a developer or an applicant that what you're buying a credit for is actually covering your development and making sure your development is phosphate neutral. Furthermore, if you actually overbuy credits, and there is an issue of how you buy the credits and sell the credits, that's still being worked through by our colleagues at Wessex Water, you'll be able to sell them back. So therefore you'll get money back for buying over credits. Thank you, Helen.
Thanks, Paul. Just picking up on a comment in the chat myself, if an individual has some land that could be used for mitigation measures to balance their planning application, is that a quicker solution? The answer is yes. And Rebecca will correct me or chip in if she needs to, but I think you need to seek independent advice from your agent and look at the balance through your nutrient neutrality work. Did you want to add anything, Rebecca?
Only to say that's entirely correct, Helen. Nothing further to add.
Thank you. Leanne, is there anything else coming through?
Yep, so do we have an idea of how much land will be required over the next 10 to 15 years to mitigate these impacts? And just to tag on another question here, will council-owned land be considered for phosphate mitigation to enable accelerated delivery of developments?
Thank you, Leanne. I can definitely confirm that we are engaging all of our authorities with our property teams and looking at council land. I think Paul's already sort of named a couple of sites where that is the case. So yes, we're looking at everything we can, and obviously council owned land will be something that we can bring forward more quickly. Did anyone else have anything to add on that one?
Helen, it's Matt Turd here.
Please, Matt.
So I'm not able to to preempt a figure that might for the amount of land, but I think it's dependent on the type of mitigation that's going to be put in place, isn't it? So it could be that a large sort of wetland in exactly the right place in the catchment would reduce a large amount of phosphorus, whereas smaller measures, sort of small tweaks to land management, for example, you would require a lot more of those to deliver the amount of phosphorus required. So I think it underlines why your strategy is important, and why some of those schemes like the nutrient trading scheme are important, because it'll enable us to bring forward a balanced package of measures, from on-farm measures through to larger strategic interventions like woodland or wetland creation that would account for large amounts of phosphorus.
Thank you, Matt. Scrolling through the question and answer, there's a lot of people asking if there will be formal responses provided. Yes, I confirm that we will be collating the questions and answers anonymised, and that they will be available when we're in a position to publish the recording of today's session, so that you can all see all of the questions and the answers. And at that time, we will also be providing a link to a document where you can sign up to be involved in the strategy going forwards as a stakeholder, especially where you feel that you can contribute to solutions and mitigations. Leanne, is there another question, please?
Yep, so economic regeneration schemes like Future High Streets and Town Deal Fund are receiving significant government funds over the next couple of years. So how will you work with us to make these schemes happen and benefit our communities in light of this issue?
Thank you. Paul, can I pass that to you, please?
Well, I think the first thing is we're acutely aware that a number of these government schemes, especially where they're funding, have got time restrictions. To those ends, we are pushing central government, MHCLG, for example, Homes England, to relax funding restrictions in terms of the spend. Quite often they're either tied to financial years like this year or next year, and we are slowly making progress on that. I think part of the angle we've come from is that we've highlighted that this issue about phosphate neutrality affects disproportionately small to medium-sized businesses and enterprises, and those are the backbone of this economy in Somerset.
Thank you,
Alan.
Paul. Scrolling through the questions. Leanne, are there any more there for us? Or have we kind of exhausted the common themes that are coming through?
Yeah, I think generally, I'm just having a scroll through again. There's still quite a few coming in.
Helen, I believe Peter's managed to join us now as a presenter, and I wonder if he has successfully joined us, whether he wants to say something further on the calculator.
Thanks, Rebecca. Can I hand over to Peter then, please?
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can indeed.
Oh, lovely, thank you. Okay, yeah, just with response or in response to a few of the questions regarding the calculator, and then to put it into context. So the calculator is based on the Stodmarsh guidance that Natural England has developed. We do utilise the farm scope of data for Somerset. So the key point on the calculator is, yeah, it's not a perfect, it's not a one-size-fits-all calculator. It won't necessarily be useful for what we would call non-standard developments, or developments that are just a little bit different, or where there are particular land uses.
We've lost him.
Oh no, can you hear me?
Yeah, carry on, Peter, sorry.
Oh.
Or not.
No, we've lost him.
We'll try and get Peter back. Might be some issues there with connectivity. Looking at the comment chat then, comment from Michelle Cusack, who's one of the County Council directors who was leading on the climate emergency work. I think there are definitely win-wins from working together, and a meeting of the minds between colleagues addressing nutrient neutrality and those leading on the climate emergency. Happy to convene a meeting to look at what those opportunities and implications are. Thank you, Michelle. We will, of course, keep engaged with you as we move this forward. Leanne, are there any final sort of comments, or have we exhausted the themes?
Sorry, there's one here. There's been quite a few quite specific questions, it seems, from agents, developers and consultants regarding specific planning application related questions. And someone has asked if we could have a separate specific Q&A session with developers on these sort of questions.
Thank you, Leanne. I'll pass over to Rebecca in a moment, but my understanding is that each of the planning authority development management leads has been engaging with their agents forums to try and engage on these issues. Rebecca, is that something that you believe to be the case?
Yes, Helen. So Somerset Western Taunton held an agents forum a little while ago. We will in due course be doing another one. And I know my colleagues across Somerset have been engaging with their regular agents as well on phosphate matters. With regards to individual specific planning applications, please discuss those direct with the planning case officer for the relevant planning authority. The other thing that the councils have organised is we have a session with the House Building Federation. I want to say 25th of this month. So we will be working and answering specific questions with the House Building Federation on that date, so that there will be another opportunity then.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, that's great. It would seem that we've come towards the end. It seems that we're coming towards the end of the questions. They're slowing down. Leanne, just one final comment, if there is anything, or are we really there now on the themes?
There's a good question here actually, which might be useful, is how long will off-site mitigation schemes need to last for? It's understood this could be 80 to 120 years. What happens if in 60 years' time the mitigation schemes are not delivering the desired results? So I guess a long-term sort of monitoring of whether this is successful.
Yeah, that's, I mean, any of my colleagues feel free to chip in, but we are looking at long-term mitigation solutions. We're looking at securing them through legal agreements, 106s. They are something we're going to be exploring through the strategy, including a mechanism for their ongoing maintenance and to ensure that they're performing. Does anybody else want to come in on that point for me?
Helen, it's Matt Hurd here. Is it helpful
Thanks,
to say
Matt.
a word on that?
Please do.
Yeah, so I think you know, legally to deal with the phosphorus issues, they will need to be long-term solutions. However, we are working you know, both with the local authorities and with developers directly to find shorter-term sort of bridging solutions, so that we can unlock development on the way to developing some of those longer-term solutions, sort of in the understanding that it might take time to develop some big pieces of strategic mitigation. So we're hoping to develop a system with you, and this is particularly where, you know, nutrient trading will have a role, is to bridge the gap so that we can unlock development quickly while we're working on some of the longer term solutions.
Thank you, Matt. That's really appreciated. We've got so many questions that we need to respond to in the chat. We've done our best to respond to as many of the common themes as we can. So what I propose, just as a quick recap, we will be putting a recording of this session onto the websites for each of the planning authorities. We will be making available the question and answer sessions alongside that recording, and we will be putting something up for you to register your interest if you would like to be involved as a stakeholder moving forward on the mitigation solutions, and we'll come back to you in due course. I would very much like to thank our contributors today, Rebecca and Paul on behalf of Somerset Western Taunton for the work that they've done, Peter Thornton from Royal Haskoning, Matt Hurd from Natural England. It's been very challenging to pull this together in this way. We would have preferred to engage with you all face to face. Unfortunately, that's not been possible for the reasons that we all now fully understand. But we do thank everyone for their time and attending today, and we are looking forward to working with you into the future. So thank you, everybody. And unless there's any final words from my colleagues around the room, I'll draw this event to a close. Nope. Thank you all.
Thank you.